Next up, let's talk about a gun that was once pretty obscure in America, with just a few commercial exports here, but after 2004 became very popular for good reasons. But today, since surplus has mostly run dry, is starting to fall back into obscurity. The Czechoslovakian VZ82. Concealed carry choice of a generation. Of the guns we've looked at, this is the most unique and really just independent of all of them. A lot of the earlier ones were just copied for one reason or another from Walthers. And the Polish guns had some interesting internals, but no, the Czech gun here was its own thing. And they always went their own way. Where this video could easily devolve into Czechs, but we'll say they had the VZ82 and 7.62. It was their own gun, but they never were super happy with it. But they kept it for 30 years because of economics. Plus, they had the VZ50, VZ70, and 7.65, 32. They did the job for smaller guns. And, of course, they had the awesome VZ61 Scorpion, the machine pistol in 32. But eventually, Soviet pressure to finally conform with 9x18 and just the need to kind of standardize and update led the government, the ministries, to issue kind of requirements in 1970s for a new service gun. They wanted a gun that had kind of an all-weather finish, corrosion-resistant, long service life. Interestingly, they wanted a gun with an ambidextrous safety, kind of forward-thinking, and they wanted a gun with a noticeably higher capacity than the Makarov PM. Still needed to be a direct blowback gun. It needed better ergonomics than the preceding guns, the VZ70, the VZ52. Also better sights. Just all around easier to use. And, it needed to be relatively affordable to produce as well because, well, of course it did. And this concept was developed at what we would think of today as CZ around 1980, 1981 and entered into testing. Now, it fired a 9x18 cartridge, but it wasn't the Russian loading. It was actually an uprated loading designed by Seller & Bellot, S&B, to be 20-25% umpier, had a lighter bullet that was made out of like a compressed lead powder material, and it traveled at least 100 FPS faster. So a little more punch, so the gun would be able to take that. So they're really squeezing what they can out of 9mm. But I hate to even call it 9mm Makarov. Let's do them the honor of calling it, 9mm CZ or something, or S&B. So we have the cartridge and we have the gun. I don't really know much about other competitors. I mean, in communism, sometimes you just had a pistol. It was designed. It was trialed out. No wonder it passed. It was adopted by 1983 and to put it into full-rate production, and would be produced just shy of a decade, with it ending in 1992 after the end of communism, the so-called Velvet Revolution. But it would actually stay in service, much like the P-83 Grenad, into early NATO operations, although they did start to replace it, at least some units, with the CZ75 and some other derivatives in the mid-90s. Anyway, what is it, and why was it such a popular carry gun in America? That's a nice gun. Pretty similar specs overall. The length is about 6.7, 6.8 inches, so slightly longer than a Makarov. Barrel is about the same, about 3.8 inches. Weight is a little heavier, 28 ounces unloaded, but there's a good reason for that. This is our first, double stack. I guess you could call it high capacity, but gun. Instead of 6+1, as we've seen, 7+1, 8+1, this is 12+1 as standard. I should also mention there's a minor variation in magazines. This one has the machined base plate. Some have a stamped one. As you see in there with the mag catch, My one on the right is a little stiffer just for not use, but it has an ambidextrous mag release too. It does have the ambi safety. Now, it cannot go on with the trigger in the forward position. It does have to be back, which is a little odd. It does not act as a decocker. It's a very 1911 style. So ambi controls, although the slide stop is only on the left. But of the controls, that's probably not one you're going to use all that frequently, frankly. It's an interesting derivation, spring-loaded firing pin, all that good stuff. You can see where they went to larger sights than what we've seen on previous guns, kind of part of the thing. Nice big sight ramp there to make that a better. You've got thumb cut grips, center grip panels. Nice wide trigger, very smooth in double. Quite nice in single. To kind of appease the all-weather corrosion resistance, instead of doing a blued finish like we've seen on most of these, it actually has a black kind of baked-on enamel coating. Paint type finish. Chrome line bore. And it is polygonal rifling. For when this was created, very, very forward-thinking. And I've told this story before, but it's always worth thinking. When these first came out, I ordered one. I worked for a guy friend part-time at the gun shop. Now, they did not release these in America until after the sunset of the assault weapons ban because they didn't have a magazine less than 12 rounds. They didn't want to develop a special mag, so they just didn't. But in 2005, they started coming in because you could have 12-round mags. He ordered one for me. I told him, hey, I got it in, he said, but I sent it back. And I thought he was kidding. I said, haha, when can I come out and pick it up? He goes, no, I got it in. It was shot out. There was no rifling in the barrel. You wouldn't have liked it. Jeff, it has polygonal rifling like a Glock. So we both had a bit of, I was like, please call it back and order me another one. And this is it. This is the one I've had forever. I mean, I get it. He was just looking out for me, being a buddy, but, you know, it's just unknown times there. So that was the first wave that came in 2005, and they were pretty popular. They were a little expensive when they first came in, but the prices would drop. But then in 2007, they really got a big boost because after a petition to the ATF from a museum, the VZ82, probably the most advanced Makarov, was declared CNR. So you had a 12+1 double single action gun with perfectly good sights, ergonomic grip, pretty small size, and it's able to be purchased on an FFL03. And keep in mind, you didn't have the choice of carry guns back then, nearly 20 years ago, that you do today. A lot of guys bought these, and it's CZ. It's a known brand name, so it wasn't like you were just buying a off-the-shelf type deal that no one knew. It disassembles very similar to. Now, you cannot pull the trigger guard down with the magazine in. Once it's out, pop it down. And from there, hey, I caught it in my lap. The gun disassembles. And again, the lock work is very different. Very easy to field strip. What keeps it from moving with the mag in is there's a little bump in here. But I will say, I've had guys like go to do refinish these. There's a lot of small pins and stuff, so easy to take apart for maintenance. But if you're going to do a complete detail takedown, there are a couple areas that will probably have you pulling your hair out. Just you have been warned. No disconnect safety, of course. So you can't put your mag in till you pop that up. Lanyard loop back here at the bottom of your mainspring. I mean, come on. These are the guys that did bring us the CZ75 and so many other great designs. What would you expect anything less? Good gun. Most people think they're at least as accurate as any others, maybe more so thanks to the better sights. The capacity is great, trigger's perfectly good. A lot of custom guns turned from these because at one time the price did get very reasonable because they came in for years. Now, even before the surplus VZ82s came in, there was an export version known as the CZ83. Now, some were done in 32, which is pretty cool. They had like a, high capacity 32. They also had a 380. Now, they were very similar to this, except they had a square trigger guard, no lanyard loop, and typically the 83s had a more attractive commercial blued finish. So a few of those came in. I remember seeing them in the 90s, but never owned one. But I wanted the military one here anyway, so that's fine. And they all have date codes. So they started flooding in by 2005, and up to about 2015, you could get them easy. Now, how many did they make in just under a decade? 200, 210, maybe 220,000, give or take the commercial ones. So slightly more than some we've seen today, but not a huge number. But, for Czechoslovakia, not bad. And even though production ended with communism, they would actually serve in the Czech Republic and Slovakian armed forces for at least a decade. Like I said, they did start phasing some out, but others would carry on into the 21st century, and why not? For a defensive gun, especially with the Seller and Ballot custom loading, you would not feel under-equipped here. Now, this really is the most advanced version we've looked at. I love the one-ad, the P.3. It's very conventional, but it does everything right. And the R61, very small, very light, but not the most fun to shoot. And the original Makarov, just a very sturdy gun, very easy to maintain. So few parts, so little to worry about breaking. Good safety for its day and time. Communist star on the grip, what's not to love? But it was aging out. And you would think, now that communism's over, this was kind of the last of the Makarovs. And you're almost right. I guess CZ took the whole ambi thing to heart with the requirements. Here's the holster. It too is ambidextrous. Inside you have 3 pockets, and so you can shove your spare mag or pistol on either side. Heck, there's even a mirrored place for the cleaning rod on either side, meaning that you can hang it on either side of your belt by just switching the gear around within the same leather flappy holster. So if you have one loaded in the chamber, two mags, that gives you 25 shots in one little capacity. For a defensive gun, not bad at all. And you could get spare mags, holsters for these when they were coming in surplus pretty dang easy. In fact, that's kind of the benefit of all these Makarovs, with a few exceptions. Spare mags have been very available for just a few bucks over the years, at least during their import cycles. So it was always a good idea to stock up and get at least 3 or 4 mags per gun you owned. For old time's sake. I do like the updated grip they put on.
Yeah.
And I insist this is a Russian holster, even if it's a Czech holster. I say that because I literally bought it in a Russian gun shop. And we're going to talk about the Makarov PMM, the modernized PM, as represented by my IJ70 18AH. Commercial, but it's about as good as we can get because even the military ones are pretty rare and very, very, very few are here. This is essentially the same gun. Anywho, I'm happy to have it, and I've had it a very long time, and it matters a lot to me. Going back to the original PM, as I said in the first video, really the Soviet intervention, the war in Afghanistan, was the pistol's just first true test by fire, and it did very well. It was reliable, dependable, a lot of good things soldiers had to say about it, but there were complaints about it being a little light on the cartridge, not much armor penetration, 8+1 capacity. Also, the sights were considered a little small. The snappy recoil not as good for accuracy on follow-up shots. There was room for improvement and modernization. And by the late 80s, the Ministry of Defense knew that, and they assigned the project of doing it to Izhmash. Well, not. Assigned the project to the traditional maker, Izhsk Mechanical Plant, later to be known as Izhmek or Bakel in America, IMS if you prefer. And basically what they wanted, it needed to fire a new, hotter cartridge. They're basically going to go the same route that Czechoslovakia did by going to a lighter bullet with more powder behind it to make greater speed, 20-25% more oomph. Is it what happened? The version that Russia used would be an 85 grain bullet versus 95 to 93 on the original. It also needed to have a higher capacity, more than 8+1, obvious reasons there. And it still needed to retain the mechanical dependability of the original and be backwards compatible with the original Russian cartridge that the PM had been using. So it couldn't just be a one-way deal. And finally, let's improve the ergonomics a bit to try to get better accuracy, especially out of follow-up shots. See what we can do there, tinker with the design. Now, they knew that eventually they were going to need a new cartridge and thus a whole new gun. They're also in the middle of a war, and the Soviet Union's falling apart. So it's going to take money and time they just don't have. We're going to modernize the PM as a transitional and interim measure. That way we could at least produce, a couple 100,000 to re-equip the frontline troops, like, for example, Spetsnaz. Then as it would turn out, the VDB, the airborne, they really could use a higher capacity, harder hitting handgun. But they didn't want to lose that utter reliability, simplicity that the Makarov had established. So the folks at Izhsk would get to work, and in 1990 they would introduce the finalized design here, at least as much as it ever became finalized. There are lots of variations. And it passed state trials. And even a few started to go into Soviet service by 1991, and then poof. So technically the PMM was the final Soviet adaptation and I guess the last Soviet handgun, because it was just barely trickling in before it was all over. And that could have been it, but instead it would continue on into the Russian Federation era. Good. Alrighty. High cap max. Held open. So after a small delay, it would go into production in 1994 and start going to select units. Again, Spetsnaz, the VDB, some military police, and others. It was never meant to be a widespread adoption. Again, just who needed it. And ultimately, hard to say how many would be made. I've seen figures as low as 50,000, as high as 150,000. So let's say 100,000. And I do believe that does include other versions like this one here. It did see frontline use. In fact, it was in Chechnya, Georgia, and has been seen in recent years in Ukraine. What about its replacements? The whole Makarov line was supposed to be replaced way back in 2003. Didn't happen. Then there was a new replacement announced in 2019. Hasn't at least happened in full yet. That seems to be kind of how Russia rolls. They introduce all kinds of new designs, but they've got so many legacy pieces that it's a long road to fully replace them. Anyway, what makes a modernized Makarov? Well, the first thing we talked about was the new updated PMM cartridge. Like I said, it was 20-25% more oomph. Supposed to have a little bit better armor penetration. It was never fully adopted, meaning that you don't see a lot of the PMM 9x18 rounds in service. To make the guns work reliably and safely with it, they did introduce kind of a 3-spiral flute chamber system. Although a lot of the later guns, especially commercial ones, wouldn't necessarily have the spiral cut chamber because why would they? Some of them might have crept in with it just because they were using up parts, but there's no way an American would get that cartridge, and if they did, it'd be a collectible, not something you go out and shoot. So I wanted to point that out, but that is really the only mechanical change. Again, one of their things that they were told to do is, keep the dependability and also kind of backwards compatibility as much as possible. Now, to help with accuracy, they did go to a new grip style with thumb rests, checkered back strap, and we have a checkered front strap. You also notice the frame on this is a phosphate finish. That's actually correct. And then the slide and the trigger are blued. Early PMMs seem to be just a blued finish. Later ones could be more or less all phosphated. Guns like this are a mix of both. Synthetic grips. There's a few different grip styles we see too. There's also a couple of different shapes of trigger guards. I've seen one that's more squared off. I mean, hard to say which one's right or wrong because they used them all. There are even some with a slightly different style of slide serrations who are a little bit wider and spread apart. Now this one has the adjustable sights. That was something done. Target sights for importation here to pass the 1968 Gun Control Act. Although one can imagine, since one of the complaints in Afghanistan were that you could see better sights coming in, but no. Of course, you could always just put a different slide on this because it will take a standard military slide. And this is all remarkable because the biggest feature of this gun, along with the PMM, was its double stack magazine. Now our CZ has a 12-shot mag, double stack single feed. Notice it comes up here. Notice how this one has more of a kind of chimney there. That was so standard PM tops would fit. The only difference is the lower flared out area here, keeping compatibility. In fact, one neat thing, you can take an 8-shot mag and it will, with some finagling, go up in there. Now it will flip around, so it's not combat proven, but it will work. And back in the day, a lot of the aftermarket makers here would offer an alternative base plate that was wider for a mag, so you could use 8-rounders in your high cap. And that's because the high cap mags were always kind of scarce in America. They came in, but not in great numbers. So if your gun didn't come with the mag, or your mag wore out, or you just wanted extra mags. But I think that's pretty neat that you can use that in here. Very clutched together mag. This is a 12-shot. My other mag, different style here. Notice the body isn't welded two pieces. It's a single piece body. This is a 10-shot mag. They actually did experiment with 10-shot mags and 14-shot mags during the trial phase, 89, 90. But the military settled on the 12 here. But we don't have that many because of the wonderful 1994 assault weapons ban, meaning pistols that came in after September of that year could only have 10-shot mags. And since the gun was only really put into production in 1994, you kind of see the problem. Only the first batch or so of these came in. By the way, the name of this, like I said, is IJ7018AH. The IJ70, that's just a commercial name that IMS or Bakel used. They used the same military tooling, just making some changes where necessary. The 18 is for 9x18 Makarov. If it's a 380 version, it's 9x17, so it's 17 in the name. The A is for adjustable sights, and the H is for double stack, high capacity. as I said, this is a Czech holster, but I did buy it in Russia. Kind of makes me wonder if, since so many Czech holsters were on the market in that era, if that's not just what they didn't do too. I mean, why make an all-new holster for a gun when there's one available? Because the gun's too fat and the mag pocket is definitely too wide for this on a standard. That's my Hungarian, but where's my Russian? Yeah, it wouldn't fit. You get the idea. So it wouldn't shock me. I don't know that for sure, but it's the best holster I could get for it, and it looks good. But no, this is a gun I've had a very long time, 25 years. And I still like it. Still shoots well, and it's still Russian. Thought I would try some hollow points in the IJ70. I've got a 10-round mag for this time. Let's see how this does. And shall it? It's also probably the most modern Russian pistol we're going to get, at least directly out of Russia, because any of the newer ones we haven't been able to get for various international agreements, bilateral treaties, and of course since 2014 and 2022 various sanctions. So who knows if we'll ever get anything better. And it really is pushing the Makarov about as far as it can go. You see 380s more than the 9x18s, and even when you find the 9x18s, they're the 10-shot usually. So I just happened to stumble into this one a long, long time ago. But back in the day, the commercial Russians, while they were perfectly valued, they sold for far less than the military ones. And today, that's even the case. For a long time, I would actually say one of the Bakel or Imes Izhmek marked ones were undervalued. You could pick up one of these for, say, $150 in the box with spare mag, whereas a Bulgarian surplus was $250. Now, I get it. There's not as much cool factor being commercial, but in terms of shooting, it wasn't surplus. It wasn't worn out. It had a brand new bore. It was a good choice, and they were absolutely every bit as solid. The only thing they did, and this happens on some late military styles too, they went to a very simplified stamped slide stop here, slide release. See? Versus the machine style. But to me, that's kind of made up for by this one having the phosphated frame. I think that's kind of cool. And I like this style of grip. I've seen 3 grip styles for the double stack. Kind of funny. As far as I know, this is the only one that has the lanyard loop. But I could be wrong. Still held on with one screw, though. It's every bit as simple as the standard version. And some might consider this not a true PMM, like it's a hybrid. That's fine if you want, but to me it's the same gun. And it's seen a lot more military service than you might think. It's not like they just made it and then it never went anywhere. Or, like I said, tens of thousands have seen Russian service. And it'll be one of the last guns I would ever get rid of. But I'll ask you, well, which would you rather have? The Russian double stack or the Czech double stack? The Czech gun definitely feels more refined, nicer features, but this one has that classic Makarov sturdiness, and it's the only actual Makarov in our video today. Everything else was a variant that just had to be chambered for the 9x18 cartridge. So I appreciate you hanging out for video 2. I don't know why I felt like talking about Makarovs again. My straps are getting all hooked up. But I did, so appreciate you hanging out with me and enjoying them too. Shot a little bit here. So I'm curious which one you kind of like best. The SMC, which supposedly stands for Small Makarov Caliber. 918. I don't think it'd be anyone's favorite to shoot, but maybe I'm wrong. The slightly nicer, definitely easier to find and more affordable Pt.3. You know, I like these, but I never was super in love with them, but that was the beauty of these kinds of guns back in the day, is you could pick them up even if you just weren't completely enamored, wasn't a big deal, frankly. The Polish P64. I want to admit, I really like this gun. Enough so that I almost considered several times about getting a second one with the later style hammer. But I can't quite get myself to do that, you know. But the WANAD over here, I was so happy when these came in the country. I guess this is the most recent one, because, as I said, they didn't start coming into 2008, 2009, and they really came and went pretty quickly. But it's potentially my favorite to shoot. Yeah, one I really quite enjoy. Now, how was that?
Man, I love that gun. That is sweet, man.
You are so full of shit.
Maybe you like the Czech VZ82. It's probably the most practical. Value was great for a while. And it crossed a lot of divides for guys collecting comm block like myself, for shooters, for defense people. It was a really popular choice for a lot of reasons. A lot of guys. It's kind of sad to see them starting to disappear from the market today. Then, of course, a gun I'll probably never let go of. Yeah. It's got a lot of too much connection to me. And, you know, I don't think I've ever seen one quite like this again. I presume it was a relatively early import in '94. But I don't mind the commercial ones. I really don't. They're Russian. But yeah, if you'd like to help support the channel, because micro ammo is not cheap, you can always check out Patreon. I actually did early access to both of these videos over there. You can always do a super thanks here on YouTube. Check the backlog of the channel for other comm block videos. And on behalf of the new kitten and the good old cat, I guess we'll all see you very soon next time.